Major changes have taken effect this week in real estate. What does that mean? Well, there was a antitrust suit that NAR settled with the plaintiffs and DOJ, and there has been some changes that we knew about them back in March, and then now it has taken effect. So what are the key changes? Well, we're going to break them down into 3 sections. MLS, multiple listing service. We're going to talk about the sellers and how does that affect the sellers, and we'll talk about the buyers and how that affect the buyers as well. So we'll start with the MLS. Well, now the Department of Justice, they have said we need to decouple commissions. Well, we'll start with the MLS, meaning in the MLS before, where a buyer would engage with their buyer agent and they would place an offer on a property, and it was identified whether it was 3%, 2.5%, 2%, 1%, it doesn't matter, $1, we could have offered $1, but it was guaranteed to the buyer agent through the MLS. Well, now that field has been completely taken out. They threw that field away. So the buyer agent, the buyers cannot see what the seller is offering. So what does that mean? So for sellers, now you have 3 options. We're seeing in terms of you hire a listing agent, you agree on what you want to pay the listing agent. Now the question becomes is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what do you want to offer to the buyer agent? Sellers are saying, I want to do it these 3 ways. I will continue to go ahead and give you 2%, 2.5%, 3%, whatever that amount is, and I want you to go ahead and advertise it, but not on the MLS, that we are offering co-op to the buyer agent. That's 1. 2, don't say anything about how much we're offering, but I want you to go ahead and say, hey, we're offering concessions to the buyers. So then in the offer, you can actually give the money directly to the buyer agent. So sellers in the past couldn't do that. Now they could do that. They can actually offer buyer compensation directly to the buyer agent. And the third option is to pay the buyer, and then the buyer can actually pay their buyer's agent. So things have changed for the seller that we don't advertise upfront how much they are willing to offer. That is all handled during negotiations. Now let's talk about the buy side. The buyers have the most change. In my opinion, it's actually a great thing. Why? Because before the buyer commits to any agent, now they get to ask them, what are you willing to offer while I'm buying for this home? What are the services? What are advantages that I get to work with you that I have versus the other agent? Well, now the buyer has to sign a buyer broker agreement with that agent. That buyer broker agreement identifies the length of time of that agreement, whether exclusive or not, where they're buying, and the most important part, how much are they committing to paying that buyer agent? So now, can the buyer agent get their compensation from the seller? That is still happening. I'll talk about a couple of the cases of what we've seen here in the past week and what has happened. But that's the commitment from the buyer. Now they have to sign a buyer broker agreement with an agent before they even go to look at any houses. They can speak about the industry and what are the services, but they cannot see a home right away. They have to sign a buyer broker agreement. So what we've seen in the past week, we have seen buyers go in contract. They are sending a form to the seller stating that here's my compensation that I've signed with my buyer and I would like you to pay for that. And they've agreed to it. And there's been negotiations back and forth. And we've seen sellers where we have a listing that we just went in contract last week. And my seller was happy to actually pay me and I paid the buyer's agent directly. And that's all in the forms now. Before, the buyer didn't see that. The sellers did, but the buyers didn't. I think this has a lot of transparency that's going to go into our industry. And yes, it's going to shake the industry because this has been about 100 years worth of practice. So there's been a lot of noise in the news, but I think it's going to settle. And this is actually good for buyers. So if you want me to explain further what these laws are about and some of the pitfalls, because you got to pay attention not to hire the wrong person that's going to actually not fight for you and make you overpay. And now you're committed to their commissions as well. Feel free to reach out, 408-515-1613, and we'll break it down for you. Bye-bye for now.